In this tutorial, we will take a look at the Ultra Volumetrics third-person component. We are once again in the beautiful stylized Egyptian map, but this time at night, making it even more difficult to see through the thick fog. Volumetric fog doesn't have to be just a visual effect but could also be incorporated into gameplay. As seen in the Paint Mode tutorial, I have placed two Ultra Volumetrics actors in this level. One low to the ground and the other higher up. With the near fade distance parameter, we can adjust when the fog should start to appear at a certain distance from the camera. But with a third-person or top-down character, the camera is in another position in relation to the character, which might make it difficult to see the character. That's where the third-person component comes in. Let's open up our player character blueprint and set it up. Click on Add, and search for Ultra Volumetrics. Then click on the Ultra Volumetrics third-person component to add it to the blueprint. There are two parameters which we can set: the radius and is player 2. Let's start with the radius and increase it, which is in Unreal units. Compile and save and let's test it. Awesome! We can now see the player character clearly, but as you may notice, the lower ground fog is still visible around the character's feet. However, this is intentional. For each individual Ultra Volumetrics actor, we can set if it will be affected by the third-person component. Let's see an example of that and the difference it makes. Another very useful thing we can do is animate the radius at runtime during gameplay. As a quick prototype, I've added a cone to the hand of the character, representing a torch. I've also added a rudimentary fire material on a sphere and a point light. Normally, you would put this in a separate blueprint, but for the purpose of this example, it will work just fine. Let's quickly go over the code here. It's quite simple. I've added an input and assigned the F key to it, which means that when we press the F key on the keyboard, the code after it will execute. After that comes a flip-flop node, which when pressing the F key, first runs A and pressing it again runs B. Next is a timeline, and I've adjusted the play rate for when the torch gets lit, and when it extinguishes, meaning it will run at default timeline speed when activated, but when deactivating, it will run 5 times faster. Let's open up the timeline by double-clicking on it. I've created two simple float curves that go from 0 to 1, which is ideal for a linear interpolation. The first curve is used for setting the radius of the third-person component, while the second curve adjusts various properties of the point light. You can set the radius of the third-person component by dragging it in, and from there, drag out a pin and search for Set Radius. I've already added one here, and with the lerp node it will scale the radius from 0 to 800. The code after that sets the scale of the fire sphere. And the last part will adjust properties of the point light. Pressing the F key will first play the timeline in the forward direction, and pressing it again in the reverse direction, meaning the lerp nodes will go from 1 to 0 this time. Let's compile and save, and test it out. Pretty good. With this example you can probably imagine how it can be used for gameplay effects. In this case, by forcing the player to acquire a certain item to be able to see through thick fog. Finally, let's go over the Is Player 2 checkbox and what it does. Let's duplicate the third-person character to pose as a second character, companion or NPC. Be aware that this component is not replicated, meaning that currently it will only work for split-screen games with 2 players. Let's activate the Is Player 2 checkbox and set the radius. Next, let's drag our friendly companion into the level. Cool. So that works. But let's make it more interesting by also associating a lit torch with more visibility. Since this character is not currently controlled by anyone, instead of running the code by pressing the F key, let's make the code run on begin play, with a little delay so we can see the effect happen more clearly. Anytime now. Great. Thanks for illuminating our surroundings. As you may have noticed, the fog interacts with the player. We'll go over how to set up and use this in the interaction tutorial. That's it for now. Thank you and go create awesome things.